So I'm Dan Little, and I'm very happy today to be able to interview Chaiyan Rajchagool, who is a very distinguished Thai professor, now retired, who's written extensively on Thai history, Thai political history, but on several other subjects as well. And so we'd like to cover as many of Chaiyan's interests today as we can. Chaiyan, welcome. It's very nice to
Yeah,
be able to get a
thank you
chance to
very
talk.
much for having me here. Yes.
Well, I wanted to start with a little bit of your itinerary.
Mm,
You were, of course, born in Thailand. You were Thai,
mm,
but you had an early experience of education and exposure in Germany. How
mm.
did that come about?
Oh, it's by fate or by accident that I was a member of a German research team associated with Heidelberg University.
Hmm.
So after the field work in Thailand, I went to write up research report in Germany, Südostasien Institute or Southeast Asian Institute under Heidelberg University.
Hmm. And that was in about 1960,
1923,
1963? No, 73.
73,
73, 1973.
because I remember distinctively that I was in that city and there was a demonstration against the US, that the US toppled Dr. Allende's
Oh,
regime.
yes.
Yeah. It was my first time that I saw a kind of demonstration in the streets because there was no such thing in Thailand at that time.
Hmm. Hmm.
I was so excited. I remember instinctively about student protest.
And at that time, you told me that there was quite a lot of activism also about the U.S. war in Vietnam.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Like at the student union,
Hmm.
they hoist flag of NNF,
Hmm.
National Liberation Front
Hmm.
on Vietnam, and there are many Vietnamese students
Hmm.
and German students who supported NNF.
Hmm. So this was a very different political environment for you to,
Yes.
and you were only probably 18 or 20 years old at that time.
Yeah, a little above 20.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so you got some exposure to German youth, German political activism.
Yes.
Um, I recall that you also then became interested in a program in Great Britain, in Bradford, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that program about?
Oh, that was what's it called? Peace studies.
Hmm.
Peace studies. There was a professor by the name Adam Cole. He was at Harvard before, and there was movement in like what's his name? Christian organization wanted him to found peace studies in Bradford.
Hmm.
So I was the first batch.
Hmm. Oh, the very first batch.
Yeah,
That's
first batch.
It's very interesting.
Mm.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was, what did they mean by peace studies at that time?
I mean, at that time, I understood it. I misunderstood it in such a way that I associated with a kind of utopian society. Yeah, that we have a peaceful society. We will achieve peace. It's a kind of a utopian idea. That's how I understood it at the
Mhm.
time, which is a misconception of peace studies. Now I look at peace studies critically, very critically.
Mhm.
For example, this is my criticism. When there was confrontation, you may call war in Gaza. Yeah, what peace study could say about it? What do they say about it? Whether they side with Israel or they side with not to side, give what best they can do. They can give an historical explanation how it happened. Yes, I understand that. But how would you come to terms? How could you make a sensible explanation to the confrontation between Hamas
Mhm.
and IDF.
Well, you're right. That's one of the toughest
Yeah.
problems of conflict and
Yeah.
war and peace
Mm.
we currently face. Let me ask you a little more about how things transpired. You spent 1 year in Bradford,
Yeah, yes.
and did you also do some writing while you were there? Was there
Yes,
a
yes,
major paper or a
Yeah,
thesis?
yeah, it's called dissertation, MA dissertation.
Mhm.
It for me, it's embarrassed to read it now because it was a little bit outdated. But what it helped me was to look at social science critically. You see, my background is in science, biology, fisheries.
Mhm.
That is positivistic in its essence. And I look at the time, I look at social sciences from a positivistic point of view.
Mhm.
And I saw that whatever is like theories, whatever theories you have, there's no argument about it. Like in biology,
Mhm.
at least at the basic knowledge, at the
Mhm.
basic level of biology. There's no
Mhm.
argument whether this animal, this fish is called so and so, it belongs to that so and so and so, and the environment that it must be so and so. There's no argument about it.
Mhm.
So it's a kind of discovery. I thought at the time, mistakenly, that theories in social sciences was something like discoveries from great scientists,
Mhm.
which is turned out to be not true. Not
Mhm.
true.
Mhm.
There can be no final words in
Mhm.
any
Mhm.
theory,
Mhm.
any subject in social
Mhm.
sciences.
But I suppose you would agree that there can be better and worse
Oh yes,
interpretations and explanations.
it's a matter of debates, yeah, of
Mhm.
course.
Mhm.
So we have to study social sciences as a series of debates.
Mhm.
Yeah, one would be outdated or be like transcend or new discovery quote unquote, that and always challenges
Mhm.
always to come. Yeah,
Mhm. So Bradford was 1 year.
1 year. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And you finished that master's paper. And then what was next for you?
Oh, I went to Manchester,
Okay.
sociology. This is from the influence of a friend of mine,
Mhm.
a classmate of mine. He criticized peace studies. That they're not rigorous theories,
Mhm.
which it was true. It was true at the time because peace studies was about to establish itself as a discipline. Yeah, there's not many theories about. Yeah,
Mhm.
there were some big names like Adam Kerr, like Johann Galtung, and some others.
Mhm.
Not really rigorous.
Mhm.
So this friend of mine, this classmate of mine, who got a degree in sociology, he said sociology is full of theories. So I was enticed. Yeah, I was interested in that. So I applied for further study at Manchester, and they accepted me. And not on the account of my peace studies, but on the account of my research paper that I did when I was a member of German research team at
Mhm.
University of Heidelberg.
Mhm.
And they accepted me because of that,
Mhm.
on that ground. Yes. But I went, it was very, very difficult, very difficult for me to follow, to catch up with sociological theories like Weber, Marx, Durkheim, and all these people. It took me some time
Mhm.
to catch up with
Mhm.
the current at the time, current theories of
Mhm.
sociology.
I recall that one of your advisors, one of your faculty members, was a person whose name I knew as Theodor Shanin.
Yeah.
And his history in the Soviet Union,
Mm.
or history doing historical research about Chaiyanov, your namesake.
Yeah.
Was it interesting to work with Professor Shannon?
Yeah, Professor Shannon was a very interesting background as a person. As a person, he was Jewish, but was born in Poland. But the time that he was born, that part of Poland was a part of Russia. So he knew Russian. He studied Russian, and Russia at the time used French as a second language. So he knew French, and as Jewish, he knows Hebrew, and his father was German, so he knows many languages, many languages. Of course, English, French, German, Hebrew, Russian, Polish, like that, polyglot. And he's a very interesting professor, like argue and like rigorously. So I study under him for a time. Then Professor Hamza Alavi, he was in Leeds at the time. He came over to Manchester, like promoted, got like a senior position of reader in Manchester. So Professor Chanit transferred me to Professor Hamza Alavi. And because of his understanding of Indian history, Pakistan, Indian history, and also really a rigorous theoretician. Without him, I could not have finished my thesis.
So it's interesting that his experience was Asian as well as academic career in Europe. Because what I find interesting about your own career is your own immersion both in Southeast Asia, but also in Germany, in Great Britain, the multiple perspectives that you've learned and the multiple historical experiences that you've had, to me, are a very enriching part of your life as a social scientist.
Yeah, you can say that when I was out of Thailand and look back on it, like you distance yourself from your own country, and you more or less was not under the influence of the current thinking in Thailand. When I studied in Thailand, I studied science, fisheries. So I didn't have much idea about social sciences taught at the time in Thailand, which is, looking back on it, it's a blessing because I didn't know the Thai version of social sciences, and I was not really under tutelage of big professor in Thailand, but I became like under influence of British professors, so to say, and German professors, and that helped me to distance myself from Thailand and can look back on Thailand critically.
So one of the things which I feel like I've understood from you is that the experience that you had in Germany and the activism of student organizations at that time also gave you an interest and a kind of openness to Marxism, to the theory of historical materialism, to the idea that not a dogmatic materialism, but the idea that we need to understand social change, social conflict in terms of large sources of conflict, like the control of the economy or the property system. Your experience and then the experience of Thailand while you were out of the country was highly conflictual with some very terrible events occurring during the 1973 to let's say 79 or 1980. Some parts of that time you were in Great Britain, but I'll just put a marker in the fact that your genesis as a social scientist was influenced, as my own was, by some thinking about large structures, large forces, large issues of class and power, exploitation, and colonialism. Your first book was also, I think, your dissertation, and it was just a remarkable book, The Rise and Fall of the Thai Absolute Monarchy, The Rise and Fall of the Thai Absolute Monarchy, which appeared not in Thai, but in English. And when I read the book, after meeting you 5 or 6 years ago, I found it just absolutely intriguing. But maybe you could talk a little bit about what you were trying to do in this book.
In the period from 1970 to 1980s, Marxism was in vogue. Yeah, it was the academic environment at that time. But again, there are many versions of Marxism. You can be dogmatic, you can be orthodox, Marxist, you can like uncritical Marxist and all that kind. So there are many versions of Marxism. Yeah, I didn't understand them at that time, but gradually, I still adhere to the tenets of Marxism still today, but not the versions I find uncritical, orthodox, and dogmatic Marxism. Thanks to my reading of Capital in Manchester, we read Capital in Manchester like in detail, and we had professors like Gareth Statement Jones and other prominent Marxist academics to explain it to us, some chapters of the book. I found, my God, this is a great intellectual treasure, and therefore you can say that I have not abandoned Marxism. I mean, we studied Weber, we studied other great thinkers as well, but I mean they were appealing to me at that time, but I became critical of it. For example, Durkheim, very nice writings, very persuasive in his arguments, and Weber as well, very sophisticated and all that, like phenomenology and functional, and many traits of sociological theories. Yeah, I was under their influence at times, with different times, but eventually still Marxism is my ground that I can stand.
So this history of the absolute monarchy in Thailand, I understand it's fairly different from the histories that are written by historians in Thailand.
Yeah.
So what is kind of the main organizing thought?
Yeah, I think the main one, the principal one is my version of history of Thailand is that it's premised on the fact that Thailand was not a country. It was in the process of state in the making. But many, or the most, if not most, let's say, if not all, have different premise. They started as Thailand, as a country, which just came into being. Very few historical studies in Thailand, which distance themselves from this premise. So when you have this premise that Thailand had been a country, if that is your premise, when you have like in my view is colonial conquest in different parts of Thailand, they call it reform. They call it reform as if it was already a country. Then you make a reform in different parts of the country, which in my view, that is colonial conquest. There is a professor, well-known professor, David Wyatt from Cornell. He was very influential among Thai historians. Yeah, he thinks along this line. But okay, leaving that aside.
But just to underline what's innovative and I think a very important insight, the idea that that Siam/Thailand
Mm.
was a state in the making,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
nation in the making,
Yeah.
but not fully born.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Therefore, this is a question of state formation.
mhm,
Not only Thailand, many other countries, including Germany,
mhm,
including Italy,
mhm,
yeah, and many other. And the process of state in the make has not been completed, has not been really in the final stage. As we know, like Germany, East Germany, West Germany, and like Ukraine and Russia, they are in conflict. This is also a question of state formation.
mhm,
Yeah, it's not. So how you draw the territorial line, state territorial lines?
mhm,
That's still a problem still today
mhm.
in many parts of the world.
So how does that unpack into the question of the absolute monarchy in
You
Thailand?
see, this is the state in the making, coincide exactly with the formation of absolutism. They went hand in hand. Absolutism just came into being in the process of state formation. That they are like two sides of the same coin.
Mhm,
This is my, I think, if I'm not to being immodest, it this is my discovery, if you like. Yeah, the process of absolutism and colonialism is the same. It is one of the same thing. And that's why when my book is translated into Thai, this thanks to my editor, thanks to my translator, she changed the name, the title of the book instead of the Rise and Fall of the Thai Absolute Monarchy, which I don't like the title. Looking back on it, it's cliche. It's a kind of a cliche. I regretted it. But my translator, my editor, changed the title into the colonial and the absolutist state in Thailand.
mhm,
That I like that title much better.
mhm,
And if my book, this book in English, was to be published again, I would like to use that title.
mhm, mhm. So when you refer to colonial conquest, does that imply that Siam consisted of multiple kingdoms or multiple jurisdictions,
Yeah.
with one
Prince,
jurisdiction,
yeah.
princedom,
Yeah.
becoming the dominant one, and
Yeah.
then conquering or
Yeah.
absorbing others? And the South? What about the south of Thailand?
You see, let's put the term Siam.
Mhm,
Siam, the ruling class in Bangkok did not know the term Siam. They didn't understand what was Siam. Siam is a British term that the British gave it to this area,
mhm,
particularly what is today the North, the Central Plain, and the South. So in the process of colonial conquest, Bangkok was the dominant power. So it's extended power, political power, economic power to the north and to the south. And this coincides with the British movement. It's called Northward British movement from Singapore and from southern what today Malaysia. So they came up. You see, they also extended their colonial conquest to further to the north, which is today the northern state of Malaysia, Malaya at the time.
mhm,
So and they met Bangkok expanding colonial conquest in the south. That's where they met between the British and the cities or townships under Bangkok influence.
mhm,
If you are with me, like Bangkok was in alliance with some townships in the south, yeah. And when the British moved up, and the Bangkok and its allies in the south moved down, that's where they met and they draw the line between Malaya and Thailand today.
mhm. And that was in the 18th century?
Yeah. It's around 1910, around 1910. Before
1910 or
that,
1810? 1910. I
Yeah.
see.
1900, around that area,
Uh-huh.
around that time.
Interesting.
So
Within,
that's a problem today, that Bangkok encapsulate Malay-speaking people in the south.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, as I understand it, this book kind of breaks paradigm, breaks thought process with
I would
other
like-
more traditional.
I would like to think so. Yes. Yeah.
And you did some revision, I think, for the Thai translation.
Yes. Yes. And I would like to extend it further
Mhm.
from the book ends in 1932. I would like to extend it to the present day. In the light, how can we look at the history from 1932 to the present day in the light of state dynamism from the period of in the 19th century to 1910 or 1932.
So that would be an extension of the story that you tell here.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
But it's also a very event-filled period of time for Thai history. 1932 was a coup.
Some say it's a coup, some say it's a revolution. Yeah. It's up to your political position.
And what was the result? What change occurred?
You see, in 1932, which I like to call it revolution, marked as it is, but it make an advance in historical terms, that they change the absolutism to what I say, I would like to term it post-absolutism. I mean, absolutism is still there. It's still today, but in a different form. And that's a watershed. 1932 revolution was a watershed in the characteristic of the Thai state.
It seems like a very important period for modern affairs, for understanding Thailand today, which is a very complex and somewhat dark situation.
I wish, or I hope that the historical analysis from the period of the state formation until 1932 could shed light on the ongoing process of Thai state formation as well. You see, this follow my supervisor's theory that in many developed or developing countries, the state play a very, very dominant role. And like in many African countries and many developing countries like Pakistan, many other countries, including Thailand, of course. And from that, the state has become very big. Professor Hamza Alawi used the overdeveloped state. And the state has become parasitic, like huge organizations and work very ineffectively, particularly Ministry of what they call themselves defense. Huge army, huge air forces, huge army. Haven't done anything substantially. And they didn't fight in any war except suppression of the dissident in Thailand. And by doing so, they have grown very, very big, gigantic. It's like a tumors of Thai society. This is great parasitic organization, and many other ministry as well. Big, huge, but don't do their jobs very well. Perhaps, with the exception, perhaps in my view, Ministry of Public Health.
Mhm.
But I mean, they have problems. They have problems. They have certain degree of corruption, but less than other ministries, like less than Ministry of Education, many other ministry. I mean, among all these ministries, the Ministry of Public Health perhaps relatively better,
Mhm.
more admirable than other
So
ministries.
going back to 1932,
Mm.
I believe I recall you talking to me about Dr. Preety.
Mm.
Who was he?
A very interesting man. He was one of the leaders, if not the leader, of the 1932 revolution. He was a law student in Thailand and went to study in Paris to study law and political economy and what is called. And when he came back to Thailand, when he collaborated with some were students in England, in France at the time, collaborated with him and with military men, army men in Thailand, and topple, not topple is too strong a word, to change or introduce constitution to Thailand.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this marks the change in absolutism.
Mhm.
Now, more or less, we go by laws, not by words of the king.
Mhm. So what you called post-absolutist monarchy,
Yeah,
could you also call it constitutional monarchy?
that's what they say.
Mhm.
That's what they say. But constitutional monarchy, it would mean that the monarchy is under the constitution, but it's not true in practice in Thailand.
Okay.
They just adopt the word.
Okay. So Dr. Preety, is it Dr. Preety?
Yeah.
So Dr. Preety was a young man in 1932.
Yeah. Around 35.
And he continued to be an influential person in Thai politics.
Among certain quarters, yeah.
Mhm.
He was, you can say that he was in power or running Thailand only for 15 years. And then after that, he was kicked out by coup d'etat and went to live in exile in China and then later on in France.
Mhm.
So his work was confined within these 15 years.
Mhm. Mhm.
But his ideas, of course, ideas change. Yeah, different ideas, different economic environment, but still influential, well, highly respected. Highly respected.
And would you call him pro-democracy?
Oh, yes, of course, of course, of course.
Mhm.
Of course, he is. Of course.
Mhm.
I hold him in high esteem.
And you met him, I believe.
Yes. I met him many times in Paris. At the time, I was in Germany and I was in England. So I went to France to see him, and twice or once he came. I think he went. Yes, he went to England during the time that I was elected. I was elected to be the president of Thai Student Association.
And that was in what year?
1977. 1977.
So it followed the coup and massacre of 1976. So that was a very tumultuous time for Thai people and Thai students. I assume. Probably interfered with your studies.
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. Because at the time I was in Manchester and I had to travel back and forth between Manchester and London. The association is in London. And it almost destroyed my studies, but never mind. That's the past, that's the big lesson.
Thank goodness the the studies came to a completion, a successful
by
completion,
accident.
and you then returned to Thailand
Yes,
in roughly
1984. No,
Oh.
yeah, I completed my study in 1984. Yes,
a long time
Mm.
and returned at that point to Bangkok,
To Bangkok, to the Thammasat
to
University.
Thammasat, which had been the site of terrible events in
Yes,
1976.
yes.
Yeah.
And was founded, Thammasat University was founded by 3D. And-
Founded by Preeti.
Yeah,
Interesting.
And then in front of the university building, main building, is his statue.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Of course, he himself, 3D, he gave interviews and even in writing that, yes, people in the later generation should learn about his mistakes.
Mhm.
He admitted there are some mistakes
Mhm.
because he was young and inexperienced or that. So we don't worship him in that way, like an icon of semi-god. Yeah, we study him and look at his political roles and political decisions in a critical way.
So another person you talked to me about was Dr.
Oh, yeah.
Pue, who was had many functions in Thailand, but was rector or top officer at Thammasat during the terrible events of 1976. And from what you've told me and from what I've read, he was a very admirable character. Maybe just tell me a little bit about him.
I hold him in high esteem. And when I was a minister and administrator at faculties, and I had to make decisions, to do this, whether you should adopt this way or that way. Believe me or not, I thought about him, whether if I were him, how shall I put it? What he would do in this situation. Of course, this is imaginary. It's imaginary.
Right.
But I thought, okay, please, in a way, in addition to my mother, when I asked for her help, whether, should I do that? Should I do that? In addition to my mother, is him. When I was administrator, if Dr. Pue was in my, if he was in my position, what would he do? What would he do? Of course, I could not. I'm sorry to say that I compare myself with him. No, I don't mean that. He inspire me.
Right.
Inspire me.
Right.
To do quote unquote the right thing.
Right.
The right thing. I
And
hope
a really important example of that was in October of 1976, when, with great courage, he stood up against violence against students on that campus. I don't want to talk too much about that event, but I just really admired him for his courage.
The events caught him unaware. He didn't expect it before. A few days before the 6th October took place, he was in a meeting with graduate volunteer students, and he was a little far from Bangkok. And he rushed back to Bangkok, but it was already too late. But he might have sent it before. He might have, but I don't know. I didn't talk to him about it. But it's a great pity.
So he also spent essentially the rest of his life in exile.
Because his mind was English. So after the 6th October, he went back. He couldn't stay in Thailand.
Right.
So he went to live in England.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's inspiring to hear his story. I want to change the subject a little bit now, because you and I have talked several times, many times, about Dostoevsky. And this is another aspect of your intellectual life, which I think is very intriguing. So I'd just like to ask you, why is Dostoevsky and why is Russian literature so interesting to you?
I think for me, he's a spiritual mentor, if you like. I found him by accident because I wasn't a student of literature.
Mhm.
He caught me, my God, with strong emotions, like, my God, what kind of writer is this? And I think I have been reading him, like, I think almost of his works, perhaps with an exception of a few short stories, perhaps, but and thinking about his writings inspire me spiritually and question the so-called standard of morality. What is right? What is wrong? What should you do? And how you should measure your action? How should you look at yourself, your relationship with people, with the world,
Mhm.
with humanities even?
Mhm.
So there are many aspects of Dostoevsky
Mhm.
that I like adhere to
Mhm.
and like influence my thinking.
Mhm. And am I right that you're writing about Dostoevsky now?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So my title, I think the title of my book, if it's to be published, is Dostoevsky in search of ultimate morality.
Mhm.
In search of
Mhm.
ultimate morality. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's
Very interesting.
Mm.
Very interesting. Do I recall that possibly you translated some of Dostoevsky?
No, go.
Oh, Gogol. Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Well, that's also very ambitious
Yeah,
to translate.
it's difficult to do translation. It's so difficult.
Mhm.
With when I translated, I like studies by Gogol. Without knowledge of original Russian,
Mhm.
I have to compare different versions,
Mhm.
English versions of Gogol's work,
Mhm.
because different versions, they interpreted Gogol differently. And I happen to have a student from Kyrgyzstan. He was a student of mine for a certain period of time.
Mhm.
So he speaks Russian, of course.
Mhm.
I consulted him what it means, what's how to translate this into English or into Thai.
Mhm.
Yeah, with his help. Yeah,
Mhm. Excellent.
yeah.
Oh, really, really interesting to me. But it kind of illustrates also the theme we started with, which is that your intellectual roots, your kind of thinking roots, are both in an Asian culture, but also a European culture. It's very cosmopolitan, or it's very intercultural. There's another piece of your writing that I'm aware of. I can't read it because it's in Thai, but you have described it to me, and it's a book of allegories. Is that something you could talk about?
Oh, you see, during sometimes you cannot say what directly. You cannot like say directly to the behavior of the ruling class, of those in power. It's dangerous.
Mhm.
I am aware of that. I'm not that brave. But the way to criticize them, I use a leeway of literature. For example, there was a massacre, the massacre in Bangkok. So how can you say that who is behind? Yeah, who is behind? Who is wrong? Who is right? I cannot say, I cannot say it directly. So I used the Bartholomew's massacre in France, in France, to say about the massacre in Thailand. But when people read it, they understand. They understand that what I mean is not, it's not the Bartholomew's massacre in France, but it's a massacre in Thailand. So, and sometimes you cannot talk about the monarchy directly. So you talk about the monarchy in Russia.
Right. So one of the things I admire about Soviet era literature is Bulgakov.
Yeah.
And his the book I'm thinking of is The Master and Margarita.
Mm.
But he had the same challenge.
Yeah.
He was offering criticism of Stalinist dictatorship, but in the apparent story of a kind of a magical realist appearance of the devil, Satan in Moscow. It's such an interesting book, but it nonetheless was censored. It was not permitted to be published during Bulgakov's lifetime. Eventually, it was published in the Soviet Union, I think. It's just very interesting what you're saying about the need to express, the need to explore, but also then a situation in which intellectuals are constrained. That's one of the reasons I find that book so interesting.
I think Bulgakov's Master and Margarita can be read also by itself without a knowledge of Russian history. But of course, it can be related to Russian history. But for example,
there's a scene in which it's the house that eventually Satan comes to stay in for the period of time that he's in Moscow. But he gives a little history. Mysteriously, everyone in the house has disappeared sequentially. It's a mystery in the book, but in reality, it was a Stalinist reality.
At that time, the state, the government, the high class, not high class, the ruling class and their allies, they ask or they entice people to love the king. So love the king is the motto of that time. How can you criticize this motto? So I use King Lear. You see, King Lear, daughters of King Lear were supposed to love King Lear. Yes. So I use King Lear as an allegorical criticism of this motto, love the king. Who loved King Lear and who did not love King Lear, and who loved King Lear sincerely or dubiously.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. So we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but I'd like to ask you to reflect a little bit on intellectual life in Thailand or in Asia and the originality possibly that comes from having experienced two cultures in a lot of depth, European deep experiences in Europe, Germany, France, Great Britain, but formative, fundamental experiences in Thailand. How has that affected you as an intellectual? How does it make you different from other intellectuals in Thailand?
I think you can use the term disinherited. Disinherited. And by that, by being disinherited, you look at Thailand critically. Perhaps if it's what to be my self-criticism, is perhaps too much that I look at Thailand in a bad light, so to say. Perhaps a little too much. There are some aspect of that you can admire in Thailand, that you can have very positive features in Thailand. Yes, and you can be happy in Thailand. If you belong to a certain class, you can be happy in Thailand, contented in Thailand. But my self-criticism is perhaps some more often than not, I look at Thailand too critically. This is from my disinheritance.
That's interesting, which is sometimes said about a cosmopolitan perspective.
Mm.
That it is, there was a debate in the US 15 years ago about cosmopolitanism versus patriotism.
Mm.
Does cosmopolitanism interfere with love of country?
Mm.
And Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher that whom I admire very much, made the case that you can be both cosmopolitan, multiple in your perspectives, but also a loyal adherent, a loyal participant in your own society.
Yeah, you can say that this is different traits of my feeling for Thailand are in contradiction. Yeah, perhaps I used to love it too much, perhaps a little bit too much. But I hope that I will try to find my balance, like critical, but at the same time, lovingly, to look at Thailand critically and lovingly.
Which is really the best kind of patriotism. Not unthinking my country right or wrong, which was often said during the Vietnam War, but instead my country and the best service I can offer is to be a critical observer, which I think is the patriotism of Howard Zinn, the man that you and I have talked about. Chaiyan Rajchagool, I wish to thank you.
Thank you very much.
For this
thank you.
Excellent conversation. Perhaps we'll have another in the future.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
But,
you very much.
I really appreciate having the chance to just explore with you some of the things which were formative for you and some of the perspectives that you've come to about the world and about Thailand. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me also to look at myself in a different light again from your conversation.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.